My name is John Passfield, and the title of this reading will be John and Lewis Carroll, Video 9, Alice the Character's New Story. So here's my book, John and Lewis Carroll, wonderful. It's on the cover. John stares down. He's in his backyard. I'll read the summary in a moment. A door opens in the grass where there never has been a door before, and some eyes peer out at him in the dark. So he stares down at these eyes. So here's the summary as printed on the back cover, which explains the illustration on the front cover. As John the writer sits beside his pond, polishing a chapter of his new book, a door opens up in the grass, and the characters from Alice in Wonderland and Alice Through the Looking Glass peer up at him from the darkness. John tumbles down through a hole in the ground to Wonderland, where the characters are busy rehearsing scenes for a third Alice book, which they hope John will persuade their author to write. But what if their author, Lewis Carroll, has other ideas? Now, the idea structure of this novella is that after John falls down the rabbit hole and lands in Wonderland, each of the Alice characters takes John aside and tells him a story that he hopes will be a prominent story, and in some cases the only story in the third Alice book, should Lewis Carroll agree to write one. It's interesting to consider that of all the Alice characters, or that all the Alice characters but one are non-human. So it's interesting to consider that all the Alice characters but one are non-human. In Chapter 2, Alice the character speaks to John as John and the Alice characters fall down the rabbit hole to Wonderland, and in Chapter 8, she tells John about her idea for a new Alice the character story. So let's go back to Chapter 2 then. Page 10. All of the characters and John are tumbling down the hole that appears in John's backyard, and they end up in Wonderland. As they're tumbling, the characters speak to John one by one. Here's what Alice the character has to say. Hello, John. I'm Alice. Alice the character, not Alice the person. I've heard there was a real Alice, though I've never met her. If you could spare a moment or two, I'd like to tell you about something that intrigues me, something that you might not have encountered in your travels before. I've told you know a lot about books, so I'll be interested in your reaction to my ideas. So that's what Alice says while tumbling down in Chapter 2. Let's go to Chapter 8. I'll just find the page here, 53. Where Alice takes John aside and talks to him about her dream of a story that she could act in, live in, other than the story she's trapped in the Alice books. Oh, I'm so glad you've come. I feel so trapped in this milieu. I'm talking with Alice the character. This milieu is nothing but air, nothing at all. All I am is just a character. I have no life outside these books. I'm confined to the home of the characters of the underground. I have no human companion. I don't even have myself, the self I used to be, the self I once was. The real Alice, the Alice before I was me, is no longer here. I have no idea where she is. She's left me behind and gone on with her human life. I stand and listen to Alice the character, that is. We stand and talk with no background, nothing at all. Well, a couple of pages of imagery that would comment on this story, and we go on with the second scene of John and Alice the character. I know that the human Alice, the real Alice, the actual Alice, is alive and has gone on in her life, Alice the character is telling me. But I don't know any details at all. I try to talk with our author, but he never tells me a thing. In fact, we hardly see him anymore. I only see the characters in the books. But I feel that the world of these books is entirely foreign to me. The real Alice has, I assume, the life that I would have had if I hadn't been captured and confined here, in this milieu. Does our author write realistic novels? What kinds of other books does he write? If I cannot be Alice for real, I'd settle for being a character, a young matron with growing children in a book. in a realistic book with all the things that make people human, all the changes that they undergo as they move through life. I want the air to enter my lungs. I want the blood to move in my veins. I want the smiles and the frowns, the caresses and the bumps and bruises that come with time. Do you think you could arrange this? Are you in touch with the higher powers? Can you make me into the human I long to be? Well, that's Alice the character pleading with John for a different life if he can get Lewis Carroll to write it. Now here's the third scene with John and Alice the character. Please tell our author that I prefer that this would be me. Here I am, my double that is, sitting in my chair. A very attractive sitting room appears. Alice the double, Alice the character double I mean, is sitting and knitting what looks like a scarf. Doing my needlework. Do well-bred ladies do that sort of thing? Here my children come in from the nursery. The maid has given them their lesson. Excuse me, the governess, I mean. The maid is dusting the furniture over here. These terms are new to me, but I can learn. Alice moves forward, but seems to be barred from entering this scene. She can see herself, her Alice double, but she can't slide in, I assume. Here we are having our dinner. Would it start, do you think, with soup? Her Alice double sits in a chair and takes up a spoon. My husband would sit over there at the head of the table, of course. The children would range along on either side. Would there be footmen against the wall waiting to serve us course after course? Is that how things are done on these landed estates? Perhaps we'll go riding after dinner, at night, to a fancy dress ball. I must speak to my seamstress so my dress will be ready in time. I stand beside her and listen as Alice the character, sighs and watches her double and tells me in detail of her dreams. So those are the three scenes of John and Alice the character. Some would say that we are each of us two people. Number one, the person whom we have become. Get my page ready to turn here. And number two, the person who at one time in our early lives we were able to become. So that's two people we can see ourselves as. The one we have become and the one we were once able to become. Others would say that we are multiple people. The many people whom we imagined we could become when we were young, and the many-person being whom we see ourselves as at the present time. So not only do we see ourselves as possibly many people when we're young, we become many people, some would say. And others would say that they have a very clear idea of the person or persons that they would like to be at present, persons whom they couldn't have imagined themselves becoming at an earlier time in their lives. So there's so many examples of we, or possibilities of we or us. In this novella, Alice the character is attempting to imagine the character that if she can have herself placed in another story, she would rather be than the person whose story she is inhabiting. Now, I realize this is a rather complex note that I'm reading. Both the original stories, Alice in Wonderland and Alice Through the Looking Glass, and my story, John and Lewis Carroll Wonderfall, are fantasy stories. Fantasy stories are written because one can simplify the human elements to make a clear and specific point. But it struck me as I was reading the chapters of my book in order to prepare these video readings, though I don't believe it struck me at the time of planning and writing, that each of the non-human characters, the fantasy characters, seems to have a very clear idea of the story in which each would like to live should there be a third Alice book. But it also struck me that the one who didn't seem to know what her story could be, the one who asked John for advice as to the details of her story, something which none, I believe, of the fantasy characters do, is the only character who's not a fantasy character, but is a human character. Alice, the character, feels that her story will turn out better if it's the result of a collaboration with another human being. Her story has more questions for John than statements from herself. So I suppose what I'm realizing as I review these stories as preparation for video readings is that sometimes fantasy stories serve humans well because they simplify things. And sometimes fantasy stories represent the human situation in a way that's a little too clear and obvious, a little too cut and dried. The other non-fantasy characters in this novella, John and Lewis Carroll Wonderfall, aside from John, is Lewis Carroll. So there's another human character in there. There's Alice the character, there's John, but there's also Lewis Carroll. It'll be interesting to look at the story that Lewis Carroll wishes to write in light of the fantasy or realism, independence or collaboration patterns that I've noticed as I've reviewed these stories so far. So will Lewis Carroll think of a fantasy story that he'd like to live in, or a realistic story? Will he think of himself as independent from all other humans, or collaborating and interacting with all other humans? That's for a later reading. It is in the novella. So once again, here is my novella, John and Lewis Carroll Wonderfall. So it's found on Amazon, where there's more information. My publisher's website, roxmillspress.com, has more information as well. On my website, johnpassfield.ca, there's 2 free books: a planning notebook, in which I plan and write the novella and make notes on my thoughts, and a reflective journal in which I polish the novella and think of all kinds of related things and record them in that book. They're both available for free. Just click on the cover icon at johnpassfield.ca. And lastly, I'll say thank you for watching this video.